like to welcome everyone. Hi, John.
Hi, Rabbi Norm.
Good to see
Yeah.
you.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like to welcome everyone. This is an, an experiment in response to a number of people's comments and requests. And what we thought we would do is we would try it for a few weeks, every other week. So it'll be twice in August, twice in September, and then open for evaluation. Whether we want to continue, do we want to continue in the pattern that I'm going to try to lay out for you? Do we want to continue at this time frame or look for a different time frame, and whatever? But bear with me at least for today, and then 3 more times on the alternating Tuesday mornings at approximately it's 11 a.m. for you, and it's 5 minutes after 2 in the afternoon for me. I'm expecting the thunderstorms on the edge of the hurricane to just hit here in the next few minutes. So okay, hopefully I won't lose power or anything. So we after some conversation, we said we would begin looking at some of the other books of the Bible. And again, I ask for your patience and bear with me. We'll do a little bit of some terminology of the alphabet soup of what it is that we're talking about. And then I wanted to give a few minutes of some background into the book of Proverbs that we've decided to begin with. And then I'm going to assume that everyone has at least an English text, whether it's an older translation from the Hebrew or whether it's a newer translation. And if you don't, we'll make sure, but we'll certainly be reading some of the verses. And my goal is to see if we can get through at least chapter 1, if not into chapter 2 today, and just see how the discussion goes. So again, as I said, you want to talk about the alphabet soup. When we talk about the Hebrew Bible, and Jews traditionally don't use the phrase Old Testament. There are some who are comfortable with the First Testament, but again, if you say that there's a first, then usually there would be a second, and whether we accept that as being a testament is open for discussion. Same thing with the Old. That if there's an Old, then that would be in contrast with the New. And again, the question is whether we accept the literature and the collection of the Gospels and the epistles and all that writing, whether we accept that to be on the same level of the holy books that we consider in our Bible. The Hebrew phrase that refers to the Hebrew Bible it's an acronym, is Tanakh, from the Torah, which is I don't want to say the T, it's actually the Taf. So Torah is the 5 books of Moses is the first part, and that's the literature that many of us are much more familiar with, and under Marty's brilliant leadership, we've been analyzing and reading and discussing and debating now, many of you for many more years at Beth Shalom Temple Center, but then I've been doing it with different groups all over the country for years and years and years. But that's Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The second part, out of this acronym of Tanakh, in Hebrew is called Nevi'im, which is the Hebrew word for prophets. Now, that doesn't mean that the prophets are the main characters in all the books of the second part of the 3, but most of them are related to the books of the prophets. That's Proph, as opposed to the economic theories and the other kind of prophet. Then the third section with which most of us are not familiar at all, with the exception of maybe one or two of the Psalms, the 23rd Psalm, and maybe some other phrases or quotations that might be familiar. But the third in Hebrew is called Ketuvim. You have to change it from a k to a ch in the word Tanakh. But the third part is, let's translate it as the writings, or usually as the holy writings, and that's Psalms and Proverbs, and the scrolls, like the scroll of Esther and the scroll of the scroll of Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs, and things like that, as well as the the historical books of Chronicles at the very end of what's called the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. There are other holy books, and now I'd say holy, I would make it with a small rather than a capital H. There are other books in our collections of literature that date to the same time as many of the books in the Tanakh. But for one reason or another, and that's an interesting discussion for a different time, but for one reason or another, those books were not included in the official list of the Tanakh. Some of you might know the name, the word canon, in the official canon. That's with one N in the middle, CANON, in the list of books. And those books are collected in what's called the Apocrypha, or the hidden books, or the silent books, the ones that were not included. The ones that we're the most familiar with are the two books of Maccabees, Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2, which do not exist in the Jewish collection of Tanakh, but coincidentally, in most of the Christian editions of the Old Testament, they will include the books of Maccabees, interestingly enough, and one or two others. Anyway, in the third part, the book of the collection known as Ketuvim, or the holy writings, if you will. There's a further sub-collection of some of the books that are referred to by the scholars and by the rabbis as the wisdom literature. And so that's what we're going to start looking at within the collection of the wisdom literature as a part of the Ketuvim, as a part of the holy writings. So here's the background that to give us some context, if you will. In the wisdom literature in the Jewish Bible, in the Tanakh, usually refer to Proverbs, the book of Job, and the scroll of Ecclesiastes. Those are usually the ones that are considered the wisdom literature. If you add some of the books that are in the Apocrypha, in that, like I said, the hidden collection, the books that didn't make it into the canon but are from the same time, there are three others. There's a book called The Wisdom of Solomon, and we're going to talk about King Solomon in a minute. There's a book called The Wisdom of Ben Sirah, and there's Ecclesiasticus, not Ecclesiastes, but Ecclesiasticus. Again, in many versions and editions of the Old Testament through Christian printers and publishers, at least two, if not all three of those, are also included, but they're not technically in the Hebrew scriptures, in the Tanakh. Okay. When we talk about the wisdom literature and examples of the kind of teachers or sages that hand down the heritage, if you will, the legacy from generation to generation. And you might remember, you might have heard at one point or another the opening verse of Pirkei Avot in the Mishnah is that Moses received the Torah on Sinai, and Moses then transmitted it to Joshua, and then Joshua to the elders, and then on down through the prophets and the sages and the teachers and the people of Israel. Oh, and I skipped the men of the Holy Assembly. I said Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. I skipped that. Okay, all right. So, but the tradition identifies three types of leaders that have handed down the legacy or the literature or the God's holy word from Steve. I got your message. Thank you. That so three different types of teachers who have handed down or transmitted Torah in its largest sense. Okay, there's the priest, there's the prophet, and there's the elder or the wise man, if you will. Okay, the priest, the prophet, and the elder or the wise man. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of us who have reached an age of elderliness are wise, but that's certainly a title that was referred to. The Chacham is the wise person in Hebrew, and you're going to hear that Hebrew word. Chacham is an individual who's wise, or Chokhmah is wisdom. We'll talk about that. Certainly, we're going to hear that word a lot. And the Zaken is the elder. It is a Ziknei Ha'am, the elders of the people. The difference is that both the priest and the prophet had divine authority. Okay? The wise man or the elder did not. The priest or the prophet had divine authority. The priest, obviously, was the Kohen led the people in God's rights as commanded. And we just, on the Saturday morning group, we just finished the book of Leviticus, talking so much about the role of the priest. The Navi, the prophet, who we haven't really addressed so much, but the Navi was legitimate if he, and there's one minor indication of a she, spoke in God's name. The Chacham, the wise person or the elder, never claims to be speaking in God's name. Never claims that God told me to say this, or God told me to instruct you this. They speak from the standpoint of personal experience and personal learning, if you will. They never say, "Thus said the Lord," is a familiar phrase. Ko Amar Adonai. They never quote in God's name. Right? So that's what we have to remember within the context of wisdom or wisdom literature. Is the wisdom is not coming from God. Indeed, Maimonides says it's the opposite. It's exactly the opposite. Is that the purpose of the wisdom literature is for us to be able to understand God even more. It's not that we received the knowledge from God or the wisdom. It's that our experiences in our lives teach us how to live so that we can know God more or better. Okay. What we have in front of us is called the book of Proverbs, of Mishlei in Hebrew. The rules of practical ethics, discourses on moral philosophy, and they're written almost exclusively in the style of a parent to a child, or of an instructor to a student, teacher to student. Okay? Sometimes it verges a little bit into an advisor into a ruler, but usually it's more parent-child or teacher-student, teacher-disciple. Okay? The Hebrew word mashal has different meanings throughout history. Here we're translating it as a proverb. It might be a discourse, it might be a parable, it might be an allegory, it might be a witticism or an aphorism. And I'm not sure that I know the difference, but the words have been written down there. In modern Hebrew, and Steve will back this up, a mashal is an example. You say, for example, you say lemashal. Okay, that's the way that they use it in modern Hebrew. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind is that almost exclusively in the book of Mishlei, in the book of Proverbs, almost exclusively there's a literary style that we've encountered frequently in the Torah, and that's what we call parallelism. That two phrases or two verses kind of say the same thing. Okay? And it's not deductive reasoning. It's not like if A, then B. It's A and B, support each other, reaffirm each other. And the scholars or the critics give us four ways of understanding that. Okay, so I'm going to give it to you. You don't have to worry about taking notes. I'm not going to test anybody. And we can refer back to these if you want. All right. So there are four different ways of looking at the parallelism in the book of Proverbs. The first, that the second phrase is merely a repetition of the first, just using synonyms. Okay, but it gives the exact same meaning. Okay. The second one is that the second phrase is a contrast, not an opposite, but a contrast, so that if the first phrase is X, Y, and Z, the second phrase might be, but there's also a W that goes along with X, Y, and Z. And so it's not necessarily opposing it. It's kind of adding, contrasting something with it. Okay. The third pattern is that the second line of the parallelism continues the thought. It's as if the first one wasn't totally finished, and the second phrase then would continue it, and then the fourth, you could probably guess, would be just giving example of, or clarifying, okay, of what X, Y, and Z actually meant. Okay. One or two last comments. Obviously, I guess what we would call the frame of reference of the book is within the Jewish or the Israelite context. It refers to Jewish practice, it refers to Israelite culture, things like that. But by no means is the book of Proverbs only addressed to Israel. It's a very universal book and universal message. The term Israel or Jews or whatever doesn't appear in the book at all. But the word Adam or Ish for man or humanity appears more than 30 times. So it's a universal book and teaching, but written from a Jewish context. But it's not only supposed to direct to the Jews. All right. Last thing that I would say is people want to know, where'd this come from? Who wrote it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now I'm not sure when the last time was the Saturday morning group when we addressed that question about the Torah, but at least as far as Proverbs are concerned, rabbinic tradition is that it was written by Solomon, King Solomon, and it specifically is quoted that way as a statement in the Midrash and the rabbinic literature that Solomon wrote 3 books during his lifetime. He wrote Song of Songs, which is the love poetry. He wrote that in the days of his youth. He wrote Proverbs in middle age, already as an experienced person, and then wrote Ecclesiastes, vanity, vanity, all is vanities, and and wrote that in his old age. So that's the rabbinic teaching. That is not a statement of critical biblical scholars at all.
Okay.
But the rabbinic tradition is that Solomon wrote those 3 that are all collected in the third part of the Bible in writing: Song of Songs, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes.
Okay.
There's a reference to that fact, not a fact, but that theory in the book of Kings, that Solomon had a particular book or scroll that he gave to the Zikanim, that he gave to the elders and whatever. In the Babylonian Talmud, there is a reference that says that Solomon's writings were edited. I suppose that's the best translation. Edited or affirmed by King Hezekiah, approximately 700 BCE. So before the first destruction, and then the later reference, the final version as we have the text now, whichever one any of you might be looking at, and I don't mean the English, but the Hebrew text that we have now, apparently, now this is according to scholars, apparently was brought by the Sophrim, the Sophers, the scribes, who came with Ezra back to Jerusalem at the end of the Babylonian exile. So between the first and second temple. So the Hebrew text apparently is that old, according to most of the scholars. But the rest of it, like we say, is hearsay. Some of you may have looked at a commentary, and we do have a couple copies in the temple library. Or if you looked it up, I mentioned earlier, there's a commentary. It's called the Social Action Commentary, and I'll be referring to it a number of times in our discussion. Ricky's giving the audiovisual aid. Thank you. Proverbs. Okay. Shmuley Yongarich, right? All right. And so this is just one quote to finish up this background information. Proverbs offers practical advice for the human life. Scholars suggest that parts of the book were written during the Persian or Hellenistic periods. On the one hand, Proverbs seem to offer a rather simplistic theology. Follow these rules and you'll be rewarded.
Okay.
The simplicity is countered by the complexity of the messages. On the other hand, when viewed within the entirety of Hebrew Bible, Proverbs is anything but simple. It ignores or tells us to ignore older depictions of God and interpretations of value and ethics. At no point does the book mention miracles in Egypt or the revelation at Sinai. the book draws upon a new center, a new purpose, and that's us, the self. This book is about us. This is not a narration of the story of Israel or of God's role. Like I said, this collection is about us and what we need to learn to be able to live better, more humane, ethical, moral, wise lives, whichever way you want to look at it. Okay. Welcome, Miri. Rucha haba'ah. So let me pause for a minute, and then we could kind of say a blessing and look at a text. But are there any questions? Or I mean, I ran through a lot there.
Oh,
Please,
just a question here, because can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Because I actually there are startling similarities between Proverbs and even the sayings of Confucius. These are what Confucius was much later than Solomon, but and that speaks to the universality of the
right.
of the messages. But I'm just wondering if the core of the Proverbs, and as far as the scholarship goes, of what was the authorship exactly, was the core actually borrowed perhaps from another source? In other words,
Well,
it's nice for us
think-
to take credit for it, but was it maybe borrowed a little bit? There was some mention of an Egyptian code or something that.
Well, if you put two and two together and come up with with a couple of hundreds, Solomon had a huge empire.
Right.
And Solomon had commerce with nations and kingdoms all over the place. So you certainly could assume that there were interactions, and if you want to call this scholarly, but discussions between their cultural elders, or even between simple people on parenting skills. I think that would be perfectly logical to assume. Our tradition tells us to do this. Oh no, our tradition tells us to do this. But don't you realize that such and such occurs when you do that? And I could certainly see that happening. So I don't have any scholarly basis for it. Just kind of a simple assumption that we know that Solomon's scouts, and call them what you will, that they interacted in many other places. So it makes sense.
Yeah, and just in case anybody is interested, I just found this by Googling some discussion of parallels between Confucius and Proverbs. So that it's not too hard to find. There is discussion of that, and the style at times seems to be very similar too, except that Confucius was more the instruction of the young clerks who are going to serve and to serve effectively and ethically, and this is I guess the overall style of Proverbs or prevalent style is more father to son kind of.
Well, like I say, father to son, teacher to pupil, and in a couple of cases, it's an advisor to ruler. Yeah. Marty, was that a hand come?
Yes, before. In looking at this, I also came across similar terms that when I was studying Zohar and Kabbalah, the terms like Chokhmah and Bina, and like that, and the Sephirotic chart.
I'm sorry, and what?
And is there an overlap time-wise with the original time period because there are two time periods for a Kabbalistic approach. One is in the 1400s, that's Luria, and then there's an earlier one and I was wondering if there's overlap time-wise.
I was going to address the time, but not in that regard, in that I took a course once, Religions of the Axial Age, AXIAL, that Confucius, Rastafarian, the Hebrew, there's so many religions that seem to have their core the same, approximately the same time. Of course, the author of this thing was saying that I guess humans were finally at a point that they could finally identify with something spiritual. But I mean, if you start looking at the timeline of a bunch of religions all around the world, they'll coincide roughly. So Confucius and the Old Hebrew is two examples, but Rastafarian, I remember another one.
Well, and they do the same thing also when they talk of the 4th, 5th, 6th century BCE, then with some of the prophets, and also with revelation taking place and prophecies taking place around the world over in the 200-300 year, from different cultures. Marty, I don't know. I never claimed to know, to be that much of a scholar when it comes to the Kabbalah and mysticism and whatever. But there's no question that this literature predates it.
Okay.
Okay. So my again, my guess would be that any of the attempts, and that's similar also to the New Testament literature, if I may, is trying to find as often as possible to find the proof text. Okay, mm-hmm. Even though the quote may be a totally a radical reinterpretation, which happens frequently, or we know for a fact, or a mistranslation or a misuse of certain terms. But whether it's Proverbs, whether it's Psalms, whether it's the prophets, whether it's certainly so much with Ezekiel and Daniel, those texts existed first,
right?
And then the new interpretations or the mystical interpretations that were looking for validity and to be able to to justify finding adherents and followers, that they would take this this quote, yes, chokhmah and bina and wisdom and understanding or discernment, yes, those were high degrees of understanding. But whether it's on the mystical or whether it's on, and I quoted Maimonides before also, that or on the rational, right. which there were certainly times when the mystical was the prevalent spiritual approach for the mainstream community, and there were times when the rational was the more prevalent approach.
One other question. I know in reading the book on the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I appreciated, the name, and now the Dead Sea Scrolls were written at a different time period, but Sadok, okay,
Sadok,
if I'm correct, Sadok, or I'm not sure.
Probably Z. It's actually the Tzadi Hebrew letter, but Zadok.
Right. That would be a different time period. It was in the Dead Sea Scrolls, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Oh, somebody's sending me a message, but that's all right. As long as it's not one of you. Okay. Normally the prayer that we recite on Saturday mornings when we do our Torah study is certainly valid. and certainly appropriate. But I thought we would also do a Shechianu if we're starting a new book and a new venture. So I invite you to join with me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Shechianu anu v'hiyanu bazman hazeh. We're grateful to God for the sacred opportunity of joining together and celebrating our lives, our Jewish lives, our lives as students, our lives as friends and colleagues. And we're grateful that we have been sustained in life and that we have been enabled to join together in this study today. And like I said, every other Tuesday for the next couple of weeks, we'll give it a try. And then the traditional blessing when we're studying, even if the text is not considered to be the 5 books of Moses, that Torah, but Torah in general. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen. Okay. So let's let me find where I have the rest of my notes here. Here we go. Marty, when you do this, you're much more organized than I am, right?
I don't know if I'm
those
more
pages-
organized. You
if
have
those
so much
pages-
to do.
If those pages, because I was looking at the flip side. That's what it was. Looking at the flip side. Okay, so I would divide up in chapter 1. I would divide up 1 through 6, verses 1 through 6. And this is not my division. This is also division, and some of you may have a similar text. But 1 through 6, verses 1, chapter 1 through 6 are considered like the pronoun, or I don't mean pronoun. I mean prologue. I'm sorry, the prologue. Or for those of you with a more scholarly bent, the précis, right?
Yeah.
Right? You know, we're gonna tell you what we're gonna tell you what we're gonna tell you. Then we tell you, and then we remind you what we told you, right? Okay, so this is the précis, verses 1 through 6. Who would like to read?
What? 1.
Chapter 1, verses 1 through 6.
I've got it. I've got a version here.
Okay, what's your?
Okay.
Go ahead with
The
your
Proverbs,
version.
The Jewish Study Bible, the Jewish Publication Society.
That's fine. I mean, and again, if people have totally different or are wondering about why their translation might be a little bit different, then we'll look at it, we'll explore it, and we'll look at the Hebrew and see where we go.
Ricky, did you say JPS?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's what I've got too, so,
Yeah. And I think Grace has the same one.
okay.
Okay. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Oh, I thought he wasn't a king. Well, anyway. For learning and wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of discernment, for acquiring the discipline for success, righteousness, justice, and equity, for endowing the simple with shrewdness, the young with knowledge and foresight. The wise man, hearing them, will gain more wisdom. The discerning man will learn to be adroit. For understanding proverb and epigram, the words of the wise and their riddles.
The riddles.
Oh,
That's what it
definitely
says.
riddles.
Huh?
Definitely we will see riddles
I like that.
in the book of Proverbs. Definitely. Okay, so what again, if I suggested
Oh, I
that
wish we went into 7. The
What'd you say?
fear of the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and
And
discipline.
discipline, yes, yeah.
Well, the
Go ahead.
reason I didn't include 7
Yeah,
is because 7 usually stands by itself.
it does here.
Okay, yeah, and again, if you're looking for the the briefest of summaries or the motto of the book, I guess it would be verse 7.
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and all but also, but well, I don't want to get into that context yet. Okay, so okay, so we know verse 1 is, this is the collection attributed to Solomon. Okay, boom,
Right.
we've got that. All right. Then I mentioned earlier, some of these are parent-child, some of these are
Right.
teacher-student, some of these are advisor-ruler, which one, or most, or all. But what do we learn? What do we learn from those first 6? The first, or 2 through 6?
2 through 6.
Or is there, obviously, is there anything that you disagree with?
I
Anything
think
that
it's all
you
of
think
the
of?
above. He hasn't been very specific yet, although he does say to the young with knowledge and foresight, but basically he hasn't specified yet. 8, he says, my son, later he says, my son.
Right.
But here I don't see any qualification as to who he's talking to.
Okay, I want to go back already. Go all the way back to 2, to line 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
For learning wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of discernment.
Okay.
Right. What's
This
the
is
difference
what-
between what's the difference between, or why do we need? I guess one of the questions when I first looked at this back in high school, when we did a class when we were looking at this, and I remember the teacher saying, okay, let's try to come up with, not for every line necessarily, but for groupings. What are some examples? Our own Mishle, not in the sense of proverbs or aphorisms or witticisms, but in the sense of examples. What are examples? So if you had to say, what's the most important lesson that you learned from your parents or from one of your teachers on either what they taught you about wisdom, discipline, understanding, discernment, or was there a particular lesson that you remember? Was there a particular example that you remember? Was there an experience in life that taught you something? If he's starting right off saying, this is the most important thing that you need to remember, or this is our goal. I'm giving you these lessons.
I'm not following.
Well, just the phrase itself is reflecting that parallelism that you mentioned. Okay. And what they're saying here is ladat chokhmah musar is to know wisdom, and musar is like ethics, loosely translated. But it also says, but the second phrase is lehavin imare bina. Okay, so you have to also understand. It's not about knowing, but it's really understanding.
Right.
The first step is acquiring knowledge, but then you have to sort of mull it over and see if you really get the message.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
there's one in knowing it up here, right?
Knowing it,
And then
knowing it.
discerning it is how you live with it. Incidentally, so we talked about that we were being introduced to the Hebrew word of chokhmah, but the
Wisdom.
word that they're translating as discipline or discernment is musar.
yeah, which is more
And some of you
ethics
may
or-
know that Hebrew word also,
yeah.
but we don't necessarily associate it with discipline or
Discipline, no.
discernment. That's more like tradition.
Or it's well Ben Adam Musari in modern Hebrew
It's
is an ethical person.
Is an ethical, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So Musar, I know roughly, I might not be using the precise word, but roughly translated, it could kind of mean ethics or morals.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to take it in a different direction in a couple of minutes, but okay.
Mhm.
Rabbi Miri, please.
Well, Boker Tov, we are still in Boker.
Baharayim Tovim from where I am. So that's okay.
Well, from my education part, when we teach, there is a guy called Bloom, probably Jewish, Bloom, and he has an hierarchy of knowledge. And he
Mhm.
starts by know the facts. That's the knowledge. Then the second level is, as Stephen said, understand that the facts. We are surrounded by people that don't know how to do that. And the third one is evaluate. You're right from the point of view of ethical, but it's more musar lehavin. So it's evaluate how, and that probably goes into values. What do you do with the facts, with the understanding of them, and now evaluate them in your own way of evaluating, and probably the ethical one is probably the moral one. That's the musar avicha and musar imecha. So it ranks so strongly that issue that I could not bring it up.
Right. Well, we'll encounter that phrase from your mother and your father. We'll get there. Right. Okay. Marty, please.
In the book here, it uses the word discipline,
Uh-huh.
and that implies several other things. It also you when you have the knowledge of the facts, the discipline is who, what, when, and where in my thinking, knowing when to use it. You have an understanding, you develop an understanding, but sometimes you'll say something and it doesn't make any sense to anyone else. You picked the wrong time and wrong place. And so you have to, for that particular statement, so you only use these things when they apply to the circumstances. So you wouldn't necessarily
That's
say,
a disciplined approach.
right.
Uh-huh.
So I think that's what they're really getting after here, because one of the things it also implies in my mind is action. Discipline, it is action. It's more than study, and rules and regulations. It's knowing when to apply them in your own life or in a business or whatever. So you have moral and ethical ways of thinking.
Okay. And in the words of this, whether it's teacher, whether it's parent, if you acquire that discipline, looking at verse 3, your success will be through righteousness, justice, and equity. Those are the
Yeah.
goals by which you measure your life's success.
In essence, yes.
Yeah, well, that's according, we don't necessarily have to agree
Yeah.
or, or be limited to, right,
Yeah,
okay.
but in a practical sense, you wouldn't say to a child, "Don't run into the street, you'll get hurt." You have to show the practicality of it, and you have to talk about it. And when the kid does run into the street, it's not a swat on the backside that's important. It's showing what could have happened. Because as the car runs by at a faster rate of speed than the child can react, hopefully the child will see why that rule is important. And there are that's a very simplistic way of looking at things. And also, as a parent, you don't do it. We cross at the corner where it's marked to cross. And you take the child that way. It's quicker by running out, crossing the street in the middle of the road, doing some jaywalking. But the child is going to learn by experience, by what the parent does, not what the parent tells them. And I think that's a practical way of looking at this too, that it implies that you have to do more than just acquire the wisdom, more than just understand it, but it's how you conduct your life and teach other people.
Go ahead, Ricky.
Yeah, okay. Well, first to Marty, I wouldn't do the car on the crossing the street, but I'd put a kid's hand on a hot stove. At least the ramifications wouldn't be as severe as getting hit by a car. So I wouldn't have done that. But back to what you said, Norm, it sounded like you were saying that for acquiring the discipline for success, success is righteousness, justice, and equity. Like those three are in success, but I see that as four definitely different. Acquiring the discipline for success, righteousness, justice, and equity. Not that success is righteousness, justice, and equity. So I don't know if I heard you correctly, but that was what I thought.
You heard me correctly, but you're just, remember I said there are different ways that the parallelism works.
Right.
Sometimes it's
Well, there's
continuing,
no semicolon.
sometimes it's clarifying.
Well, the thing is, after discernment, there's a semicolon. After equity is a semicolon. But after success,
English,
it's only
in English.
a comma.
There's
It's
no
only a
there ain't no
I know.
semicolons or whatever in the Hebrew. So okay.
So,
So we can
maybe
interpret it
another
however we want to interpret it.
JPS reads it as four different things: success, righteousness, justice, and equity. I mean, it's a Mishnah just in how it gets translated and punctuated.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Yep. I have a question I'd like to ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
Of the Hebrew speakers here, just so I understand, because it's a very common, actually used expression, even in modern Hebrew, is musar heskel. Okay, which is it? Muspar. How would you define musar heskel? Because sometimes in modern Hebrew, it's been my understanding that it's sort of the moral of the story, or something like that. I mean, could you weigh in on that? Yeah.
Musar
Right. It's related to seichel.
Yeah, musar
Mary, go
sechel.
Okay, and how would you translate that? Musar seichel is your common sense. Your
Or your brain, your understanding. It goes that.
So this is common sense morality. Is that it, or
thought
We are going to encounter the word seichel. It will be here. It will be here. We're not there yet, but we'll get there.
But the word isn't seichel here. It's haskel.
It's heskel.
Well,
right.
it's
Which comes from the same root, but so
does.
no. It's the nikud.
It's just the nikud. So it's really as if it's.
And again, primarily to the Hebrew speakers, but the others who know some Jewish history, it's also going to lead into Haskalah,
Exactly.
which is enlightenment.
Yes.
Okay,
Which is from the same root, but it's a different
which is
word.
from
It's a
the-
different
which is
concept.
from the same,
Yeah.
which is from the same root. That is, again, it's related to the
The
mind.
brain, yeah.
It's related to the mind rather than to the heart.
Mhm.
And
Okay,
it is like
so-
Chokhmah Binah. You know, it is connected to Chokhmah Ubinah as
Right.
well.
right. They're all they're different. They're different skills, if you will.
Mhm.
Okay, they're different mental skills that this particular teacher, parent, whatever, is suggesting to the student or the child that this is what you need to develop, and by studying this text, you'll have a better understanding of what our tradition tells us, or what my teacher, parent, my personal experience and the tradition tells us. Now, there's another twist with the words that I want to throw out here. Okay, we know we've encountered this word musar, right? Which for some is ethics, for some it's tradition, it's because that's the verb of, and I quoted the Pirkei Avot before, that Moses transmits as saruha, and Moses transmits the Torah to Joshua, and then on the chain of tradition that goes on through. But there's also a theme in Jewish literature and Jewish thinking and Jewish theology that comes from the same root, and that's Yisurin Shel Ahava.
Oh.
Okay, all right, and that's what would we say? Chastisements. That's the
Suffering
negative,
of the heart,
the painful experiences
of love.
that come in life, especially through love, but that come all the way through life. So there's also this twist, or the reminder in this text, that sometimes the lessons that you need to learn are painful. They're not easy. They're not just these simple idealistic words of success and righteousness and justice and equity. Sometimes there's yisurin. Sometimes there's pain in what you have to experience also.
So, and that we have that at Pirkei Avot, that המילה הראשונה, I don't remember the first word, חוסך שבטו, שונא בנו. That's, and
Spare the rod, spoil the child. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I would go back again. I mean, Marty gave one example, and then Ricky contradicted it, with either child running into the street or putting a hand on the hot oven. But what's another illustration or example of how you learned a lesson, or how your parents taught you a lesson, or the teacher, taught you a life lesson?
He gave you the experience.
Well,
Yeah. I was going to say you learn by mistakes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Gail, please.
You learn by mistakes.
Making them yourself, or by someone,
Well,
someone
you may
encouraging you.
observe somebody else making a mistake, but and if you do it, but that's the way that really sticks. Hearing a lecture is one thing, but thinking it through, or experiencing or testing it, if you will, probably sticks better. At least that was my experience growing up. So
learn from the mistakes of others. You don't have time to make them all yourself.
right.
Good one.
And if you don't share your toys, nobody's going to play with you.
Oh, there's that. Yes.
There you go. Right. Right. Okay. All right. If we go back to the text again, like in 4, 5, and 6. So these lessons are to endow the simple. I think this is the same translation. Who was reading? Ricky, you were reading?
Yeah.
Right.
Endowing the simple with shrewdness.
Right.
The young with knowledge and foresight. The wise man, hearing them, will gain more wisdom. The discerning man will learn to be adroit. For understanding proverb and epigram, the words of the wise and their riddles.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's another commentary on verse 4.
I don't like the word shrewd.
Yeah, the writer wants to persuade the reader, or the teacher wants to persuade the student to deal with the realities of the real world, not necessarily as it ought to be, but as it is.
Right.
Therefore, shrewdness or cunning, or is the Hebrew, is at times more important than morality. Fools are not the same as those who are young. The fools believe too much. Young believe too much. No, that's right. Fools believe too much. Youth know too little.
Petty yamin lechol davar, we say. Petty yamin lechol davar. A fool is going to believe in everything.
Okay. And also it's important that of course the usage of language was different back in those days whenever it was written in modern Hebrew, but the word mizimah in modern Hebrew has a very negative connotation that has evolved. Mizimah is more like plotting,
Plotting,
it's kind of
Right.
It's not exactly something that the good guys do.
Exactly.
No, and I'm not saying that the
Conspiring.
saying is urging us to be plotters. I'm not saying that.
What do you mean?
I'm not saying that.
That's exactly
I'm
what
just
it's
saying that it is like the rabbi said. It's saying that sometimes you have to be a little shrewd. There's some shrewdness. It's not just knowledge. It's knowing human nature. It's kind of what nowadays they call it's not IQ, it's social intelligence, or I'm just missing. I don't remember the expression exactly. Yeah, kind of, but there's a classier expression for that. But
It is social intelligence.
Social intelligence. Thank
That's
you,
the word.
Jeanette. Yes.
Yes. Very good.
Okay. But that's what I'm trying to say. But that has, language evolves. Language does not stay the same. So what that word has become in modern Hebrew is pretty negative. It's plotting, it's
Right.
mizimah. But back then it was more like, I guess it was meaning shrewdness, or and here it's being I guess
And there's also, if anybody knows the Yiddish, a na'ar, which we translate here as youth, but in Yiddish, a nar is more like a
fool.
Is more like a fool, a young fool.
But does that actually come from the Hebrew? Because I didn't realize that. I thought
It's
the
a
Yiddish word
combination
was something else.
It's a combination of the Hebrew and something else. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So going on with 5 and 6, is this still addressed to? So what do we say? Again, the scholars or the critics will put all of 1 through 6 all together, and then we said number 7 stands like as the motto. Okay. Is the is 5 and 6, is the audience the same as the person who, you know, whether it's the parent, the child, the teacher, speaking to the same kind of person, or what?
No,
No,
because it's actually saying that even a person who is already wise
Right.
should stop and listen and gain what he can from what's being said here, because you're not as smart as
Listening
you
to-
maybe
listen
you
to
think
whom?
you are. You should, you know, stop and learn a little bit, and you might pick something up that's useful. So
From whom? From whom?
from the speaker or the writer, you know, who is providing these words of wisdom. Yishma Chacham. So here they're saying the difference is he's not saying this is a young person or an inexperienced person. He's saying, even if you think you're very experienced and you're very wise, guess what? You might not be quite as wise as you think you are. And maybe stop and listen to this. And, you know, because sometimes very smart people tend to, you know, not listen too much. You know, we've all had that experience. And so, you know, even if you're smart, you might gain something here. So stop and give a listen.
Well, I can go back to the punctuation. There's a period after foresight, at the end of 4, 5
Right.
starts a long dash. And again, that's JPS, but the wise men hearing them, the them will probably refer to back to 1 through 4 or 2 through 4.
Well,
The
hearing
them,
them is hearing
incidentally,
in
the
Hebrew.
them doesn't appear in the Hebrew.
Yeah.
Well, in the Hebrew is a parallelism here
Right.
in that sentence. It's the same thing, the beginning and the second part of it. Yishma Chacham, the Yosef Lekach, and now the second part, and Navon Tachbulot Yiken. The wise is going to listen and is going to know more. Of Lekach, I would call what we learn in a fable, I would call it a metaphor as well, or a lesson. And
Well, we know the
of
phrase from services. Ki lekach tov natati lachem.
Natati lachem.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
for the, you know, it's a good
Venavon,
inheritance.
yeah.
Right.
And Navon Tachbulot is also a tricky word. Tachbulot is like tricks.
Yeah. So in modern Hebrew, that's also kind of negative. That's it's learning, you know, the tricks of the trade, kind of. Yeah.
All the things that are chaval.
Oh,
Yeah.
But you have a bet there. Maybe it's more like Habala. Habala is what the terrorists do.
That's right. It's damaging. Well, I'm just blanking on the word
it's more
again.
than trickery. It's deceit.
Deceit.
No. What do they call it when enemy agents mine a bridge or something? What would you call it?
Distraction. But Lekach and Tachbulot.
Okay. What are we looking at right now?
5.
Okay, but tachbulot, these translations don't have it with a negative connotation. Modern Hebrew may have it with negative, but this one does not.
Yeah, it's just tachbulot are like
There are tricks, like you say, you know, a magician has tachbulot, you know, tricks that you don't know what it is. So the chacham, the wise, need to learn that.
Yeah, they're saying to be adroit. Not a drone, but adroit. Okay. You can tell where I am. Oh,
Yeah, Kabbalah is sabotage. Yeah, that was the word I was
sabotage,
straining to
Yeah.
remember.
That's a
Yeah.
good word, right? Okay, all right. And then again, 6 brings it back home to be able to understand these analogies, these lessons. Okay, militza. Oh, here's that other term where that I'd never heard before.
Militza.
Ape in English, APOTHEGM.
Apostasy.
Apple
Wait, spell it.
begging.
I mean,
APOTHEGM. I don't know if anybody's ever heard that word before. APOTHEGM.
no.
No.
Or,
In my understanding, it's
aphorism.
epigram.
That's
Translated as
not an aphorism.
what?
No, I'm saying that you're not spelling aphorism, so I can't.
No, I'm spelling it
No.
correctly because it appears more than once, but it's an English word, APOTHEGM, while not being very common, refers to a sharply pointed aphorism. Okay. Anyway, okay. So again, let me quote this one. In the ancient and medieval periods, being wise meant that the individual understood that information was to be conveyed in a somewhat guarded manner. Riddles may be a vehicle that wise people use to provide information to one group while simultaneously providing disinformation to another. Doesn't that sound modern?
Yeah,
Familiar.
Okay.
yeah.
It is clear that the nature of this book of Proverbs varies from the mitzvah systems that animates the rest of the Bible. The agenda of the wise was different than that of the priest or the prophet, and certainly different than the agenda of the rabbi. Unlike such figures, the wise utilized and even depended on their riddles.
Now, in this case, we can think of Shlomo, of Solomon, since it's addressed to him. It says that Solomon was the wisest person that ever existed, that he spoke 1 million languages and so forth. And the issue of riddles come into that as well, just like not speaking straightforward, but again, it's kind of metaphorical, the way that they talk. It's not just the vocabulary or the, what's the word I want, literary, not literary.
Or
not
literal,
literacy,
literal.
Literal, right.
Yeah, yeah, which is easier. So the riddles address the smart people, the wise people. Otherwise, they remain riddles, I would assume. I want to make the connection with Solomon, Shlomo, much better, about his chokhmah, his knowledge and understanding. And I don't know if it's true, but.
Well,
Yeah,
it's right. I mean, that goes to what we said is not really obvious, but maybe it's an underlying thing,
Right.
is that the purpose of this, that this material was really like a manual. You know, it's a leadership manual. As much as they are aphorisms and statements from parent, child, teacher, student, they're also, this is, Solomon, he's giving his a leadership manual to other kings, other leaders based on experience. He's couching it in the literary style of
Riddles.
Could I speak
to
to
in Education 101? Chaim Gnat. Anybody ever have to
Hey,
study?
well, he's
Chaim
a
Gnad?
psychologist, isn't he? Yeah, Chaim
Right.
Gnad.
Yeah, the
Chaim
educational
Gnad, yeah,
psychologist. Right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He's a psychologist. But could I comment on Chidot,
course. Of course you could.
on the riddle concept? Because I for me, that says that a manual that's written out very explicitly, very literally, only goes so far. And sometimes to really impart a message, it's more effective to say something in kind of an indirect way that requires some effort on the part of the listener or the reader to kind of figure out what's saying, because it might be a little frustrating at first because it isn't that explicit. I'm talking about the riddle, okay? It's not that explicit. It's not telling you something that's very clear. It's a little bit puzzling. But once you solve the puzzle, aha, then the message or the lesson really sits, and
That's
really
why a fable
remains.
is a good example. A fable,
fable,
is about
yes.
animals, and you have to learn the lekach.
Mhm.
Lekach tov
Right.
nתתי לכם. Yeah.
Which is, you could look at that as a little bit of that's a little bit of a riddle, because at first you say, okay, it's a nice little story about a rabbit, but how does that really apply?
Right.
Oh, hey, wait a minute, it does. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So if indeed we get 1 through 6, and then like we said, the number 7 is the motto of the book, or the motto of the whole thing, or the goal. And almost out of nowhere, there's Yirat Adonai. There's the fear or the awe of God. That's not the goal of knowledge. That's the beginning of knowledge. Right? In other words, if to follow through what the last comments were, if this is the manual for leadership for a king of Israel or whatever, you have to admit that you're subservient to God. Okay? You're not the ultimate end all be all. You're subservient to God, and fear of God, recognition of God, respect for God. That's the beginning. That's Reshit Kol. That's the starting point.
Rabbi Norm, at one point, and I don't remember who was the Navi or the prophet or whoever said that every king, because Israel wanted a king, but beside the king needs to be a book.
Sure.
Yeah, we call it Torah, but here we talk about guidelines that they have to follow.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. So, it's only the fear of God, the beginning of knowledge. Only fools despise wisdom and discipline, but that's the translation. Not necessarily the translations with which we began of Musar. Of Chokhmah being just simple book knowledge, or Musar being ethics. Okay, it's we said, like, it's discipline, it's self-control, it's some of these other things, as well as the Chokhmah and Bina of discernment, and all the other words that went into their recognition of success, righteousness, justice, equity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So I'm going to bring it to a close at this point, with a thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're Rabbi.
I'm surprised that, although I did get one mention that we were a little, you lost my voice a couple times, a little choppy here in the storm.
Just in the beginning, yeah.
Just at the beginning. Okay, all right. But we're doing so from Maplewood, New Jersey. I will Oh, I have to show you my belated Father's Day. It's actually a grandfather's day present. It was supposed to be a bracelet, but they didn't realize, the kids didn't realize that if I have it on my right hand, the bracelet gets caught in the guitar string. I can't wear it as a bracelet, so I'm wearing it as a necklace. The four pieces are the four grandchildren with their Hebrew names on it.
Oh,
nice.
very
Nice.
cool.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So, yeah.
Very nice.
So,
If
yeah.
I may say just
very
one
upset.
thing, I have this little book by Rami Shapiro. Rami
Yes.
Shapiro simplifies things, and it's such a small book that perhaps it doesn't cost too much. So it's just on Proverbs, and it's translated and explained by Rami Shapiro.
That's
Okay.
Rami.
Right.
Rami Shapiro. Does that have the full text, Mary? Does it have the?
Yeah, I'm trying to follow on it, but supposedly yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, it
And
goes by
also-
all that.
yeah.
Yes, but he uses different words. He's very connected with modern thinking.
Yes.
and
Yes, I
language.
know. I have some of his poetry.
Yeah. So anyway,
And
I
actually,
didn't
the
realize I
one,
have it.
yeah, there is one available online that's actually the commentary of Steinsaltz is
Oh.
Dean Steinsaltz
Okay.
Steinsaltz, yeah.
who translated the entire Talmud to English.
Yes.
So this guy has a nice commentary that you can get through
Right.
no cash, no cost,
Right.
through they do
Exactly.
encourage
Well, it's Zello.
donation, but
He
it,
accepts Zello.
Exactly. Marty, looks like you're trying to say something. No?
No.
Okay. Oh, okay, good. All right. Well, thanks to everybody.
Thank you.
Reminders
Thank you.
that
Right.
the Saturday morning is a regular Torah study class. I'll be joining, but I'll be in Los Angeles. So I get to fly all over
You
the
do get
place.
around.
Same time. It's
Yes,
the same
yeah.
time.
You're around.
Yeah.
So, and then we'll do this again 2 weeks from
Right.
today, and we'll try to continue. Thank you very much. Good